I'm Patrick V, and you're part of the podcast Reimagining Leadership, where my focus is on finding a better way to lead. And that focus is on helping you identify the behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to want to follow your lead. My guest today is Jim Bouchard, who, aside from being an executive coach with his company called The Sensei Leader, also runs Black Belt Mindset Productions and has been inducted into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame. Jim knocked it out of the park on this conversation, where we really did explore what it means to reimagine leadership. So let's get into it. Jim, welcome to Reimagining Leadership. Really appreciate you taking the time to be on. And as I was going through your bio and your site, one of the things that really stood out to me was this tagline that you had in there of from loser to leader, and talking about your own story. And I think it resonated so much with me. And I was wondering if we could maybe start there and see where this goes in regards to leadership.
We'll rip the scabs off, huh?
Early.
Early. There it is. Yeah, it's funny because I started this whole adventure in leadership started when I was a drug addict. I was in my early 20s. I was living now that I know you're from Maine, you'll relate to this. I was living in one of those old 1950s style trailers you see around once in a while with the heavy louvered glass windows and all that stuff. And beautiful little plywood bump out on the front, duct tape to hold the windows together. You know,
Any blue tarp or no tarp?
Oh, I'm sure there was some sort of plastic covering on the roof someplace. Exactly. You got it. And that was a really dark part of my life. I was up to about 8 bong hits a day. For people who don't know what that is, it's a water pipe that you fill up with marijuana. And the only cool way to do it is to smoke it right down. Keep it yourself. And that's going to become important in just a second. And then all the other drugs to keep the party going, to slow the party down, so on and so forth. I mean, it was pretty intense for a while. One particular night, somebody passed me a joint. I didn't smoke joints at the time because I couldn't get high on that. It took a lot more than that to get me high. So I bogarted. I took the whole thing for myself. And as many drugs as I did, I was always pretty mellow when I got high usually. But something kicked in this particular night. I started running around the trailer. I guess I tried to dive out through the louvered glass windows. And fortunately, my friends got me tackled and calmed down a little bit. Long story short, woke up in the morning and looked in the mirror, and it looked like I went three rounds with Mike Tyson. I had made a mess of myself. And that was the day I said, that's it. I can't keep going like this. And it was a good thing. We found out later on that joint was laced with angel dust. So it's a blessing. I mean, it's a blessing that I wasn't dead or in jail so many times. Most of my friends were betting I wouldn't live past 30. So, the point of that, used to think that was a pretty lousy resume for somebody that worked in leadership and trained leaders. But I came to realize how useful it was, because I'm sure you'll agree. I mean, the most powerful leadership, we can argue what all the different styles and techniques are and whatnot, but it all boils down to just a couple of things. And transformation is one of the most powerful. And I know they've coined that now, transformational leadership. Nothing new, right? We were joking before. I mean, Lao Tzu talked about that 2,500 years ago. Who better to talk about transformation than somebody that had to learn it in order to survive? And so all the lessons that I learned along the way there really have a lot of resonance with people in leadership positions now. I mean, the best leaders are transformational leaders. In fact, the best leaders are the ones that make change happen, right?
Yeah. Now, I'm sure for you, right, the decision was made then, but I'm sure it wasn't a smooth trajectory up to success, right?
Yeah, you might say that. No, there's always ups and downs, right? I mean, and you want to make the dragon laugh, tell him your plans for tomorrow, for one thing. And we're all feeling a little bit of that right now. And, part of it is, I think part of the worst words we could ever say in our life is things couldn't get any worse, right? Because as soon as you say that, it's a pretty good chance something else will come along that's even worse. The trick is, how do you keep pulling yourself back out of the fire, right? How do you, in martial arts, we have a saying, knock down 7 times, get up 8. Sometimes I share that at conferences and people will say, what happens if you get down, knock down 9? I said, well, then you get up 10, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
That's what we need to do. And sometimes it takes these hard knocks for us to really learn that lesson. This is where we learn those lessons.
And I completely agree. I think when we look back on these things, if you ask most successful individuals, there were struggles. And those are the things that they often point to say, those were the turning points for me. It wasn't everything going, well, that's how I got to where I am. It generally is the things that weren't going well that somehow you said, this was this was the lesson I needed.
Oh, amen. You hit it right out of the park. And I wish I could remember the study to share the attribute of it, but it's a study done some time ago of the highest performing entrepreneurs in the world. And the central question was, how many times did you fail? And we're talking catastrophic failures, bankruptcies and
Right.
living in a car and these types of stories. And surprisingly, most of the top entrepreneurs in the world, the people that have built the biggest companies, have had at least 4 or 5 major failures before they found the success that really moved them forward. So we hear the stories a lot about the people who were born with silver spoons in their mouth, but the superstars in the entrepreneurial world are the ones who really took the knocks and kept coming back.
Right.
Yeah.
And kept coming back.
Exactly.
Right. And kept coming back. Obviously, the other part of your story that you talk about is a 2-time, not once, but twice, a 2-time college dropout, which I think is very interesting, right? You were
practice.
Sort of an overachiever there.
It takes practice. I didn't do it right the first time. I decided I'd do it again.
But as we transport ourselves forward, you've written multiple books. You were inducted into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame in 2004. Is that right?
Oh, you read the good part of the bio too. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 2004. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lifetime ago, huh?
So as we're sitting here right now, we're in this crisis. We have unemployment that is going to be at levels that we have never seen in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think to how many people think they are that loser for whatever reason, that they're spiraling down.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I think your story is so important for people to say, look, here's somebody that, again, dealt with many challenges. You can do it too. And as you work with your clients and individuals and speak all over the world, how do you do that? What are some of the things that you would be telling somebody right now that's in this space that they're struggling?
Well, it's interesting because part of the reason I share that story, and I always appreciate it when someone says, thanks for sharing that story, and I'm glad you put some humor in it and you're comfortable with it. But then if they catch me after the presentation, I have to come clean. I say, I'm not comfortable with it at all. I said, I'm ashamed of it. I mean, nobody wants to go through life with that label of a drug addict, and the true regret of having lost about 3 years of my life to that episode, that just wasted how many years trying to repair the damage, right? So no, I trained myself to share it with some degree of comfort and humor, right? So that people would be able to absorb it. But we all got that inner loser in us. And I'm sure there's interesting studies that show, again, some of the highest performing leaders, the best leaders, are people who have a healthy sense of humility, right? And a healthy sense of vulnerability, uncertainty, personal uncertainty, internal uncertainty. And so it's not to push that loser side of us or that loser feeling aside necessarily. It's to pay attention to it, right? Shake hands with that person, that loser side. But then we can't get stuck there. That's the problem. If we get stuck there, if we allow ourselves to get stuck there for too long, then we slip into a state of clinical depression. I mean, that's how that happens. It's a matter of taking stock of what we've got. And that's another part of the reason I share that story too, that I started to learn to be grateful at the worst part of my life and to be grateful for what little I had, because I remember one distinct time, and it was in that trailer still. I just looked around. I didn't know if I could feed myself that week. And this is, my poverty was self-imposed, so I'm not looking for anybody to feel sorry, but poverty is poverty. And when I didn't know if I was going to eat, I looked and said, hey, thank goodness I have a place to live. And I had some people that were looking out for me, right? And it started from there. Because wherever we're going to go now, if you're feeling like a loser right now, I understand. Believe me, I've had my moments the last few weeks, right? Patrick, you and I were talking about this just before we went on. A lot of our friends in the speaking world looked up, and all of a sudden their entire year was gone as far as work goes. And even though it wasn't our fault, you can't help but say, what the hell's wrong with me, right? And how do I get started again? Now, one of the other things that I learned to help manage through a situation like this is, again, that gratitude practice, to take stock of what we have, no matter how little it is, emotionally, spiritually, and materially, and then decide what's the first step. What am I going to do from here? Because there's so many opportunities in this, and I'm not being I hope you know by now, I'm not lollipops and puppy dogs,
Yeah,
right?
no, I
Yeah.
hear exactly what you're saying, though.
I mean, I'm talking about from living in a van and not knowing what I was going to eat that day, to say, what can I do? What can I do with what I have and the talents I have and the skills that I have? How can we reapply them? And I think that's very important right now. There's a lot of people that are looking, right, how do I repurpose the skills and talents I've had over years? But I'm not diminishing the pain, man. I understand. I feel it. I've been through it before. And particularly people, my age and older, you don't want to start over again at 60, 70 years old, right? But if that's what we've got to do, then man, let's look at the opportunities. Here's another way to say it. Someone after a presentation one time said, Jim, I had asked the question, I'm sure you've asked this question too, right? Who do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years, 20 years, right? And I remember this one woman really caught me on that. She said, well, Jim, you've been asking us, where do you want to be in 20 years? I said, I have no idea, but I can guarantee you, I don't want to be the same person I am right now, right? Let's always be learning, growing, and changing. And that's one of the great lessons I learned from my martial arts masters. I mean, that was powerful.
There's a quote that I have been using for about a decade now, and it's by a gentleman named Eric Hoffer, who was around in the 50s, I believe. And the quote is, "In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to inherit a world that no longer exists."
Nice. Please send that to me.
Isn't that it is
that's
so
beautiful,
because it speaks to what you just said, that leaders are learners.
Mm-hmm.
That if we're not learning, then we're not growing. And if ever there was a time we're in change, this is it. If you're not
right?
figuring out what things are going to look like
Yeah.
going forward, and that's where, hearing your story, when I think of that, I think of resources and
Mm-hmm.
resourcefulness,
Mm-hmm.
and that we all lack resources, right? We don't have enough money. We don't have enough time. We
Yeah.
don't have the right education, but we all have equal access to resourcefulness,
I like
regardless
that.
of where we are.
I like that. Yeah. And, and that's part of managing the uncertainty too. The world is change. That's what it is. Sometimes when things are going smoothly, we don't notice it as much. We have this illusion of the status quo, right?
Yeah.
But things are always changing. And that's why transformational leadership is so important as individuals and as, leaders of organizations, because if you're not changing, you're dying.
Yeah.
That's the way it is. And a crisis like this brings it out, right?
Yeah. You said something very interesting, though, in terms of shaking hands with it.
Mm.
And I think when I think of that, I think of mindfulness, this being present, and with stress too, right? Is almost sitting with it and getting comfortable in that space. Because when you do, I believe that's what you're saying, your training is probably all based around that you face it, gratitude for challenges. It puts the power back in you, as it sounds to me what you're saying.
No, absolutely. And I caution people not to worry too much about the mysticism behind it, because people can get really caught up in the mysticism of these things. And these philosophies, I was blessed to learn such practical philosophy through 35 years and counting in martial arts. And I have to say, I was blessed to be exposed to some of the greatest living philosophers we have on the planet, and amazing people. But again, I'm struggling to word it properly, but not to be Pollyannish and mystical about it. Take the gratitude thing, because that's one that people really can dive into deeply philosophically, right? But think about it this way. It is such a practical thing. It's an inventory is what it is, if you want to put it in the most tangible terms, right?
Yeah.
You're just taking a look at what you have. Again, no matter how little that is, because that's what you've got to work with right now. And it shifts your focus from what you just talked about, because we can obsess over what we don't have. And especially in times like this. And again, I'm not, it's funny, I'm preaching from the gully, not from the mountain, believe me. Part of the blessing of this life is that as I'm sharing these ideas with people, I have to revisit them too. And it helps, right? It helps remind me, what should I be doing? And to practice what I preach, right? And these times challenges, man. Like I said, I'm not lying. These curtains that hide the studio behind us, it was I've been joking with people, because they'll say, Jim, well, don't you ever get down? Don't you ever? I said, hey, look, I've pitched some fits. I just go behind the curtain so you can't see it, and then I try to come back out with a smile. And I think that's a good path for a lot of people in leadership, especially if you're responsible for a lot of other people, right?
Yeah. And again, you said that so wonderfully in terms of what we do. If we talk about even, going back to thousands of years,
Hmm.
mindfulness really has its origins, I believe, out of Buddhism. So, I mean, again, going,
I think all the great philosophies had it. They call it by different names. That was the path that I ended up embracing for a number of reasons. Part of the reason is because the teachers I had approached it from such a practical point of view. They didn't shroud it in mysticism. My one of my favorite teachers, Dr. Yang Zhuang Ming, how did he say? He said they weren't trying to be mysterious. They were just trying to figure it all out. You
yeah,
know what I mean? But it and he explained why a lot of these Asian philosophies in particular, but some of it depends. The Greek, the way people translate these things, they can sound so grand and so mystical and elite, right? And Dr. Young explained from Asia, a lot of that has to do with the way we translate it because the language was poetic. It was lyric because they didn't write things down. Most people couldn't read or write. So they literally sang these things. They recited them as poems, right? And so when we embrace it that way, wow, it can get kind of spooky. Oh, that's how he used to say. Yeah, he'd say my bad, horrible impersonation of him, but Jim, not try to be spooky, you see? And he's absolutely right about that. All they were trying to do is figure it out and make sure that people could remember it. So we got to get past that poetry and look at the heart of it. You know what I mean? Look at
yeah.
the real heart of it, which is very practical.
I'd appreciate your perspective on this. And I think based on what you just said, I've got a pretty good idea where this is going. But really, isn't that the case with leadership in general? Is that we've
Amen.
overcomplicated this.
Yeah, amen.
We've overcomplicated this. It's not about, the course on decisiveness and delegation. And
Yeah,
because when we do that, I see it from a standpoint of organizations. When we make it, oh, this is really complicated stuff, it gives people an out to say, well, that's why you can't do it. That's why people don't.
right.
It's
No, yeah,
not.
I think you again you hit it right out of the park. It's boy, we are so singing in harmony. That's why we make that distinction between management and leadership. And I always quote Admiral Grace Hopper. I think she's just a brilliant. She's one of the very
Huh.
brilliant philosophers I think we've had recently. She used to say it this way. She's an amazing woman. She was the first woman who was an admiral in our service in our Navy, and she's really known. She invented most of the high level computer technology or languages and stuff, the processes that we use today that have evolved from her work. Brilliant woman. She said, "You manage things, you lead people." And for too long, we went overboard on management. She said that a while ago, but that's still true. We still go overboard on management. Management is complex. Management is about dealing with the complexity. Leadership should be painfully simple. And those three key words that we very carefully picked, as our flagship words. What does a leader do? And I don't care what your rank, what your title is, has nothing to do with authority, right? You got great leaders on your front lines. They have little or no authority at all. And let's face it, a crisis like this has exposed some. And I'm not picking on anybody, I'm not waxing political, but there are plenty of people with a lot of power and authority that are lousy leaders. So, it's about inspiring, empowering, and guiding people. And you can do that no matter who you are. You do that with the person next to you, the person below you, the person above you, doesn't matter. So that's what it's all about. And of course, that's really what a sensei does. That's why we continued that iconic, I guess, symbolism of that.
There's a quote that has been attributed to both John Quincy Adams and Dolly Parton. So you can figure out where this is going, right? Do you know this one? Right? If your actions inspire others to
Yeah.
do more, learn more, become more, or
Yeah.
dream more, you're a learner. And again, we're back to actions that inspire.
In spirit of full disclosure, in one of my past lives, I was full time in the music business and got to play with Dolly Parton, actually.
Really?
Yeah. And I have a picture of her somewhere around here, but and she is a wonderful, wonderful person and really a tremendous leader. And only a couple of years, because I'd been quoting that for years as John Quincy Adams. And then we found out that it was Dolly Parton. And I've been saying, look, it's just as good coming from her because she is a brilliant leader and a very human-centric leader. She's a caring, loving person. Everything you see about her is the way she is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And really that to me about simplicity, right? It just, bam. Actions that inspire.
Right? What's it about? I mean, there was this huge study done. I'm going to say probably Stanford University did this study, a few $100,000 to find out that, and this is one of the number one things, leaders are supposed to help people perform at their best. That's what we do at the core, right? And people perform at their best when and only when they know their leaders care about them. Now, why we needed a couple $100,000 study to come up with this, I don't know, right? People have been saying it, and the best leaders like that. Yes, that's all it's about. When you show people caring, right?
Yeah.
When you, the technical terms, when you have emotional intelligence, develop emotional intelligence consistently, you practice good interpersonal skills, right? Don't be an undercover boss. I freaking hate that show.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Management by walking around is nothing new. It's been around forever, but it's hard to practice it. And I understand the barriers. That's what we try
Yeah.
to overcome. That's what we help leaders overcome,
Yeah.
right?
My background prior to doing this full time, I was in the biotech industry, and everything was based around what's the research that backs up why a
Yeah.
physician should take this approach.
Yeah.
To me, I translated that or transferred that same skill set of questioning is saying, where's the research? What's the data that says that these behaviors make a difference? And I will jokingly say that in the work that I do now, it's really about, I bring in research to validate common sense. That's it.
Yeah. A friend of mine calls it few research, right? And no, you hit it again, man. It's so cool. And it happens in a lot, workshops that we do at all levels, but it's interesting is sometimes in the executive workshops that we do, I'm in a room with just fantastic leaders. These guys are tremendous leaders, right? And I don't know how you feel about it, but I prefer to work with good people and good organizations. I think we can bring more value there. We can
Without
help,
question.
to help the strong be even better.
Without
Hard to
question.
fix bad in this field, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to fix bad. But at any rate, yeah, I'll say we'll be talking about some of the research and some of the data and people. We do get, I get wound up in it sometimes too. But there's quite a few times when I've just stopped the whole session and said, look, here's something you have to understand. We're the people those guys are studying. You know what I mean? So they're coming up with all these facts and figures. Why? To figure out how we inspire people, right? How we're able to empower people. How do we guide people? Because it really does come down to that level, right? How does was it John Maxwell that said really leadership is about influence, right? How do we influence people? How do we bring out the best in them? How do we get people to go, managers will meet expectations. That's what management's designed to do. Leaders blow expectations out of the water, right?
Yeah.
Because we connect on a human level, on an emotional level. So, that's interesting. I always say, I look at those guys, I say, man, no, you're the people they're studying. They're trying to figure out what you do right.
Yeah.
So let's just figure out how to keep doing it and do more of it, right?
A couple things again, as I was hearing you talk, that I wanted to come back to, especially as I think it relates to inspiring other people, that I'm sure in your own life, right, you had that moment, that aha moment where you said, I can't do this anymore. I'm guessing that there were some people along the way that were in your corner that were saying, Jim, you can do this. You're better than this.
Oh yeah, and some of them just for minutes. One of the big questions we've been getting the last couple of weeks, from leaders when stuff was really getting tough is, how do I inspire people? And long story short, with most of the folks that were asking, they were asking very sincerely, but I said, you're looking for the grand speech. That's not what inspiration is about. It's about the little things you do. It's about picking up that phone or connecting with your people on a Zoom meeting and just asking them, are you okay? What can I do to help you? Right?
Yeah.
How's your family? Not, are you still getting the work done? Right?
Right.
That shouldn't be the first question. And those are the things that are inspirational. Your example. There's nothing more inspirational than your example. And so there are a lot of people in my life that, they came along, roll of the dice, sometimes at the right moment, or I noticed them at the right moment.
Yeah.
Probably more to the point. When I was ready, right? When you're ready, the master will appear.
I was just going to say that, right? Another.
Yeah. Funny. That's one of those things that gets translated poorly through the poetry. It sounds nicer that way, but what they're really trying to say is if you're sticking your head in the sand, you're not going to see anything. And in fact, the ostrich sticks his head in the sand, his rear end's still hanging there ready to get kicked. So we got to get up and take a look around, have our hearts and minds open. And that's when we notice those people. So I was blessed with quite a few people like that. Mm-hmm.
And the other piece was around the gratitude piece. And if you sort of look in terms of rituals or things that you do, where does that fit?
Mine's very simple. And I know people that practice, a little fancier technique, and that's okay. That's cool. Whatever works for you, right? I just literally spend at least a couple of times a week. I just look around and literally say thank you and express those words because that means something. It helps me. It helps anchor it for me, right? And I actually try to do it when I catch myself sinking. And you mentioned, how do we get out of that loser mentality? It doesn't always work. I shouldn't say it. Actually, it does always work. I don't always do it, but I try when I really catch myself sinking. That's the time when I pull that out and just look around and say, just thank you. There are so many people that are in worse situations. And like I said, what it does, it's a practical inventory. I start looking around. I say, look, I have a home. I've got plenty of food. I've got supportive friends around. And sometimes it's been down to just what do I have left? Well, I've got some talents and abilities, and we all do, right? Now let's figure out what to do with them and get to work.
Now, if I'm listening to this, I have a group that reports to me. What do you think is different today than it was 2 months ago in regards to leading a group?
Technically, it's probably the remote phenomena, right? That we're doing a lot of people are able to work remotely for the first time. Some of us have been doing that kind of for a long time through this technology, right? We've done a lot of our work this way, but even then it's been a shift. I'd say though, the biggest issues are people's fear and again, trying to manage that uncertainty.
Okay.
We don't know what's happening, right? And it's difficult. This is a difficult situation. There's a lot, and I did a little video on this, about now is not the time to blame. There's a lot of blame going on, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. Again, I understand it. I'm not judging, but I'm just saying it's more useful that we put that aside. Especially a lot of our political leaders, it looks like they're lying. Most of them haven't been. It's been that they're giving you the best information they have today. And 6 hours later, it's different, right? And that's just, we have to accept some of that. Now, there's a certain bravado, and that's where I've been working with some leaders to caution them about that, not to really pick on the political leaders per se, but we can learn lessons from some of the mistakes they're making. And again, that's not being judgmental. I understand the pressure there. They're making we would all be making mistakes in that position. But having said that, let's learn from those mistakes. Let's learn something different. Be very transparent right now. If you're worried, tell your people. And you don't have to come out in tears necessarily, though a couple tears doesn't hurt once in a while, right? Be confident as much as you can, but come out strong and say, hey, look, I'm worried too. But let's put our heads together and involve people from all levels, because especially when you're disconnected physically, people don't realize how much happens, right, non-verbally and socially in an office. That's gone right now, right? So through this distance technology that we have, we've got to make sure that we're open to that, to spend some social time online with your folks. And to, like I said, to make sure that you're reaching out. Don't just assume that people are okay because you don't hear from them, right? Because again, you're not seeing them every day. So you don't have any other cues.
Yeah. Well, Jim, you bring up some great points in that as well around, I'll go back to the tears where you say, well, and that's not bad every so often.
Yeah.
It speaks to vulnerability. And this is coming from somebody that is in the Hall of Fame for martial arts, not something that you would normally think of.
I think I know where you're going with that, but that's the interesting thing. Because martial arts was part of my recovery from such a horrible thing, I think I saw a different side of that than a lot of people do. But again, the masters that I admire all came through some sort of hardship like that too. Not necessarily drugs, but something, an illness, lack of confidence. Geez, I'm trying to think of people picking on them for being small. I mean, a lot of small people that sounds silly almost, but yeah. People that were bullied and they've overcome these things. It takes a lot of strength to be vulnerable is where I'm going.
And that's exactly my point.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I think there's to be intentionally vulnerable.
Yeah.
Is the highest form of courage I think you can exhibit, because to me it says I'm that confident in who I am that I'm willing to expose myself to you because I care about you.
Yeah, and you're going down. I mean, we could talk hours about this, I'm sure, right? Because it's interesting. I think I said this earlier. I'm a person. I've always struggled with self-confidence. And I always will. I don't have enough time left in my life, I think, to fix it entirely. And I won't go into all the reasons behind it, but that's part of the reason I became a drug addict. And the conditions were wired in. We'll leave it at that for now. But having said that, sometimes I'll say to people, I said, that I'll share that stress. I'm not a very confident person. I've learned to manage it. I've learned the process to increase it. I've learned that the confidence that I do embrace is based on training and preparation, not on surety of an outcome, you see. And I said, that helps me a lot. But I'm more courageous than I am confident. And that means, right, courage is not the absence of fear. The absence of fear is stupidity. And I think, I don't think I know, it's Nelson, because I put the slide up all the time. Nelson Mandela said that same thing. Courage is not the absence of fear, right? It's facing your fears, embracing your fears, and doing what you need to do in spite of them. And so that's what it's all about. So if you're feeling a lack of confidence at any given time, I don't like the fake it till you make it thing. Just walk forward. That's what courage is. If there weren't fear and danger and risk, there isn't any courage. That's what defines courage. And I think so many times people look at heroic courage as an example. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's really the simplest kind. I mean, you can see it. Somebody runs into a fire, that you can see it. But the courage, like right now, I like people to think about, to examine their own courage right now. Are you doing what you need to do to feed your family? Are you doing your best to take care of your employees? Are you putting one foot in front of the other right now? Well, if you're doing that, that takes tremendous courage, right? Once in a while, we got to give ourselves credit for it. We got to acknowledge it in ourselves. And that's tricky, right? That's tricky, especially if you're a humble person. It's tricky.
Yeah. But when we think about this, as we're talking about this from a standpoint of leadership, and again, your actions inspiring, this is whether it's in a personal or professional setting, that to be able to speak exactly how you just did, to say, you know what, there are times where I'm not really confident. I battle with that too. When I'm around people in a group and I can say that, generally everybody gets to go, oh my God, thank you, Jim. Because now I don't have to feel like every time I'm around Jim, I've got Jim's always on, and I'm afraid I can't say what I'd really like to say to him, because what's he going to think of me? Am I, you know what I mean? Or if I'm a leader that always has the answer, when we know nobody always has the answer,
oh God,
that what it does is it makes people fearful of, I can't say that I don't know what's going on right now.
That's the
because
worst.
They're going to look at me like,
that's the worst kind of leader. I mean, there's and there's been a lot of studies done. Again, we do a lot of work in uncertainty, internal and external uncertainty. External uncertainty is what we're dealing with now, the crisis, right?
Yeah.
And we don't know when these things are, but one of our key strategies around here is be flexible, adaptable, and comfortable with uncertainty. And it takes a while to unpack that, right? How do you become comfortable with uncertainty? Well, again, we're doing it right now. You're training right now. You have to expose people to it in order for them to develop some comfort with it. And we need to think about that as we're training young leaders. We can't keep young people safe from everything. We have to manage the risk and expose, but they have to be exposed to real risk in order to grow, and uncertainty in order to grow, right? The internal uncertainty is exactly that. It's not being so sure of yourself that you're not willing to, right? In fact, I think this was a Gallup poll, a Gallup study that showed, no, it wasn't. So I'm wrong on that. I'll find it for you. I'll share this with you. There was a great study done that showed that leaders who were more uncertain, that questioned their own decisions, questioned their own strategies, questioned their own thinking, were the highest performers again. They were the most effective. And if you show a little vulnerability, you let people in on that process a little bit, they'll trust you more.
Yeah,
right?
Totally makes sense.
Because the guy who knows all the answers, I mean, leaders are not supposed to know all the answers. Leaders are supposed to know how to formulate the right questions. And that's a much higher art than knowing all the answers.
Right. To me, anybody that has all the answers, that to me is the person that I've identified. Don't trust them.
That's arrogance, isn't it?
Don't trust them, because eventually
confidence.
they're going to lead you. They're going to lead you down the wrong path.
Yeah, that's not. In fact, we talked about working with the incarcerated kids, and they come up with some of the most incredible things. And I always joke with them, because we do a session. I say, I'm going to steal that and use it at the conference next week. But one young man, remarkable young man, who I'm sure is doing well now, we talked about that one time and said, what is, we were trying to define arrogance. And he said, well, that's the person that can never admit that he's wrong about anything. And I said, there it is, right? So that's exactly the opposite of what you just talked about. Yeah. People know that all the answers are spooky people, man.
Yeah. Jim, I've appreciated this conversation so much. In regards to people being able to contact you, what are the best ways to do it, as well as listening to your podcast as well, which I'm looking forward to?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, the Walking the Walk podcast. You can find all of that at thesenseileader.com. And yeah, now I'm looking, because you're going to do all the talking when you're on that show. That'll be fun. And right now, I should say too, depending when you're listening well, we have our Sensei Leader Movement membership. The white belt level is always free, always will be. So when you come there, there'll be a button you can sign up and join. That's how you really get into it, and you become part of our network. And we've got people from all over the world right now that are part of this, and it's really special. Our black belt membership is free right now too. That's usually, I think, $29 a month through the end of May. We're going to extend it, as people are dealing with this challenge. So take advantage of that, because that's the one that has a monthly live call, and we have a good discussion every month with folks, again, from
Oh, wow.
from all over the place. Yeah, it's really cool. Good bunch of people, man. I'm so blessed.
Yeah, well, certainly I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to finally connect, living literally 30 minutes apart.
I had no idea.
Yeah, 30 minutes apart.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this is just the beginning. So again, I've
Absolutely.
appreciated this so much.
Absolutely. I look forward to when you're on Walking the Walk. That's going to be really special. All right.
Thanks. Take care. This conversation with Jim really was one that was inspiring and enlightening. He has so much experience and background, and I think his practice in the martial arts really has provided such an impact in regards to how do we inspire, empower, and compel others. And his approach certainly does that. If you know somebody that would benefit from this episode, I'd ask you to forward it on to them. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead. Please subscribe to the podcast. And it would mean the world to me if you would leave a rating or a comment on this or any other episode, because that's how this message about reimagining leadership continues to get out there. And until the next episode, I hope you're able to go out there and rise above your best. Peace.